Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. And then wow, what a horror. Anyway, I got the girl out quickly. Told her she better go now. You know, I was just in shock. Jenna gave me a pleading look. After that, Kevin told me off. And he and my husband also started talking about how Kevin has this idea that he needs young girls to keep his body's energy balanced. He said that his followers who proved themselves faithful would also have access to girls, that he, as a teacher, would reward his faithful servants. And that's when I realized what we'd gotten ourselves into. I just can't believe my husband would go along with any of this. We had a fight with him. He said he would become Kevin's most loyal disciple. He would get younger and grow new teeth and a new liver because Kevin would teach him something. My husband said that it is impossible to interfere with him, and I am his enemy against the fact that he then, under the control of the teacher with young girls, energy magical produce. And that's when the madness became clear to me. Mom, I'm going to interrupt Dad, Christopher said, and Jenna, hearing this, shrieked softly and cried and began to say that it was wrong. After all, it's Dad, and he's just misguided. Then she added that that wasn't all. Kevin wanted the apartment signed over to him. And Jenna's husband agreed. He wrote a deed of gift for his share of half the apartment. You know, it just goes to show that in his line of work, Kevin belongs to a well-known, shall we say, type of sect leaders, Noah said. Usually, it is hardly the main thing they need from their subordinates to be given money and property. Mantis is let's be strong. Okay, said Christopher, and then turned to the others. What to do? You can't just sit around and wait to see what happens next. We gotta get this bastard. You take it easy, kid, said Robert. I understand everything, but let's not panic and no hasty decisions. If you are careful for a long time, Grandpa Sebastian said thoughtfully, the fish will eat the bait and swim away. What am I saying? I think we should visit someday. Like, right away and without any curtsies. After all, he's got at least 2 people coming out now, right? He's bent his fingers. Your wife, Robert, that's 1. And my son-in-law, that's 2. So there's a good reason we're family. So we got a right to worry about family people. It's winter. Now you understand. The sun has risen, and it's already sunny. So it's better to go in the morning. And besides, I have a friend here. He's a smart guy. He's an experienced hunter too. I'll ask him to help you. He'll be back in the village tomorrow. I'll talk to him. So we'll just wait. Robert was indignant. As long as my wife is with it. If Kevin hasn't changed much, Noah reassured him, then your wife is relatively safe. He's probably giving her very long lectures. I mean, all that nonsense about his teachings. Kevin likes to take a long time to process people he needs something from, and what he needs from my Wendy. Robert asked grimly, the same thing he needs from this family, I suppose. The psychiatrist nodded at Jenna. He just intends to take over someone else's property. Sebastian insisted that there was no need for anyone to return to the sanitarium. There was enough room in his house to accommodate everyone in a slightly cramped, but quite cozy overnight stay. Noah agreed to the proposed plan. Christina supported him warmly, and Robert once again noted how quickly she had changed the object of her affections. That is, he knew in his mind that their affair was already over, but it was still unpleasant. She could not, at least for the sake of decency, not flirt so blatantly under his nose. Robert woke up in the morning, but at an hour when it was still dark outside the window. Lying on his back, he stared at the ceiling. He could not get it out of his head that Wendy, his sweet, kind Wendy, was now at the mercy of some madman who could do anything to her. I'll wait for you, of course. He muttered quietly under his breath. Robert, rising cautiously, he realized how Sebastian would go to talk to the man in the morning. It would be a while before that hunter would be their guide. Maybe another 24 hours. Robert began to pack, and he did it quietly, because he did not want anyone to stop him. He didn't intend to wait any longer. And let this Noah, this brain-dead right-winger from Switzerland, the scholarly type. But only he, Robert, is a man and a man's man, not a wimp, to sit still if he's told to. And that's why he's gonna go and save his wife right now. End of story. Like save her, but he's gonna bash that Kevin's head in. Robert remembered what Sebastian said about landmarks. If you stick to the clearing and go strictly north, then reach the big rocks, and there turn left past the frozen lakes, there would be this house. Before leaving the house, Robert thought for a moment. Sebastian might have some kind of weapon. He could use it. But on the other hand, he had never handled one in his life. And so Robert decided to go as he quietly walked out of the yard. Nada, getting out of her fortified box, gave the man a thoughtful look, and then, unnoticed by the pursued man, followed him. Her father was a real wolf after all, and she resembled him not only in appearance, but also part of her essence. When everything happened, when the merciless reality crushed Wendy and made her feel infinitely alone and simply destroyed, she would, if only she had been allowed, have given anything for salvation, whoever offered it, and whatever the price. And in those moments when the journalist on TV was talking about Kevin, the young woman's world turned upside down a second time. It was as if she was falling in weightlessness, and at the same time frozen in the void. A past that had been forgotten came flooding back. Peace, security, calmness, detachment from the problems of the real world. For there was Kevin, who had promised to take care of her. During those weeks spent in a psychiatric clinic in Switzerland, many specialists worked with young Wendy. And how did she resist their attempts to get inside her head? She resisted what they convinced her of. That Kevin was a torturer. He had broken her mind, subjugated her will. And then she realized it all. And the release came like a breath of fresh, ice-cold air. She remembered as a doctor, one of the assistants of a gray-haired elderly professor. I think his name was Noah. He had suggested that she could stay now voluntarily, and they would continue the treatment. They would help her to be completely free of the destructive program that Kevin had planted in her mind. But then there were the parents, who demanded that her daughter must hurry back home, and she didn't need any foreign clinic. She just had to come home, and everything would be all right. And Wendy did. She refused psychotherapy, as well as special medications. She believed she could cope without all that. The years flew by. Her parents didn't like to talk about it, and she herself thought it was a shameful stain on her foolish youthful past. But now the TV screen showed Kevin's face. How had he aged, changed over the years? His quiet voice promised salvation and the joy of oneness with nature. The discovery of the great mysteries. Her voice, as if to strike and caress at the same time, attracted like a magnet and frightened me into madness. I am alone, said aloud to Wendy, rising from the couch. No one needs me. I'm lost to this world. She suddenly realized what she must do. She must go back. After all, it had been a monstrous mistake to keep them apart. And he would help her again, show her the way, protect her, open her up with his care. Wendy didn't pack for a long time, just called her mother. Then she went to the ritual store and did what the image helped her to say goodbye to her home and her old life. Then she took a bus to the village of hedgehogs. And from there, with the help of a couple of concerned people, I found Kevin's house. It was amazing. But when he opened the door, he recognized her immediately. Wendy said. He smiled toothlessly. My girl, how have I missed you? And she fell into his arms with a sob. And then the door closed, and Wendy's world turned upside down for the third time. Now she was falling into a nightmarish slump of oblivion, losing herself with every breath. The winter forest greeted Robert in what appeared to be a welcoming manner. Her feet stepped lightly through the fluffy snow, which disappeared with silver and diamond chips. There were tits and some other birds around, and even the frost barely bristled, but the sleuths. Robert cheerfully imagined finding the home of the wacky hermit, breaking in, kicking the door in with his foot. And then, but there should probably be a fight between them like between a bad guy and a good guy in a Hollywood action movie. And then, of course, he's alive and not badly hurt. He will take his wife by the hand, say that she forgives her for everything, and they will go out of the woods together. This fantasy made me feel sweet in my chest, and for some reason, it sounded in my stomach. Yeah, I get it, Robert. It wasn't the thoughts. It was the fact that he hadn't had breakfast. He'd gone out. But it also seemed like it was rumbling in the stomach of someone who was following him or not. What was that strange sound anyway? Robert suddenly swallowed hard and turned around very slowly. Behind him stood the wolf. "Nada," he said. "Good girl." The animal cocked its head and cocked its ears and bared its fangs, as if to say that a good girl was definitely not for him, and quietly grumbled, snarling, "Nada." Robert vaguely remembered that with wolves and dogs, it seems, you can't run away with your back turned to them. He was also confused. Why was she following him? Why? Yesterday everything had been fine. However, it was still worth remembering that, according to Sebastian, in this animal genes mixed in half-pet and the age-old enemy of man, fearless wolf. And so some hustle and bustle in the woods ensued, as well as a clumsy chase, with the clumsiness in it 110% attributable to Robert. Two creatures, a man and a dog with a dash of wolf, ended up near an abandoned lodge in the woods. And actually, Robert had hoped Nada would leave soon. Really? All right, she got in her head and chased him off. But then she'd have to get back to her master. Robert remembered what Sebastian said about Nada being the smartest animal. He said he would not leave home for long. Generally very attached to the house, so I do not put on chains. But now, sitting in the gatehouse, Robert very much doubted the intelligence and kindness of this animal. And it was doubly sickening because he was stuck here, and he had to save his wife. And all the others have no idea where he had gone, and what would happen next. Robert asked himself the thoughtful question. Meanwhile, other events were unfolding in another part of the forest. "We shouldn't have done that, of course, hero. We are going to the lair to the maniac," said John and pulled warm gloves on his hands. He had just finished digging into the engine of one of the two snowmobiles. And seemed to have fixed the problem. John had known the Sebastian family intimately for a long time. He was also well aware of the fact that a strange type of sectarian propaganda was coming to his home village, so he agreed to help right away. And the only thing that embarrassed him was the haste and the fact that the small company was hardly prepared for dangerous surprises. "We are lucky," said Noah. "Kevin is mad in part, but he is rather cowardly and would hardly risk open conflict with 3 people, said Christopher indignantly. He was strictly told to stay home with Sebastian, who said he was too old for that. As for Christopher's father, he was definitely no longer Kevin either. He called Jenna early in the morning and started apologizing and saying what an idiot he was. It turned out that he had just at some point, woken up and realized what he had done. And so having got out of the forest, Stephen in general during this time managed to get to the city, and now he was staying with his parents, who lied to him that they just quarreled with his wife. But they had already made up. Stephen, of course, was asked if he had seen a girl in Kevin's house, and he said that yes, someone had come. And Kevin introduced her as an old acquaintance of his, but nothing more was known to him. Jenna, of course, hurried into town. She had to support her husband, who had finally stopped his nonsense, and she also had to consult a lawyer about how to cancel the gift written in haste and under the pressure of sectarians. Christopher flatly refused to stay, just to sit with his grandfather. He said that if necessary, he would jump out of the window and run barefooted after him. Only they won't go into the woods without him. "I'm allowed. I'm an adult," he said, proudly drinking his lower lip and flashing his eyes like an angry little child. "And how old are you?" asked No. 16. "Then there are no questions," grinned the doctor. "All right, you're coming with us. But promise you'll obey." Agreed. Christopher said yes, and really did what he was told, and silently rode in the second and snowmobile with John. The other vehicle was occupied by Noah and Christina. Robert's disappearance, of course, did not go unnoticed and at first even caused panic. But Sebastian made a correct assumption that he decided not to delay in rescuing his wife and went into the woods alone. And because of that, one must be in a great hurry. And then there was Nada. The old man sighed. Maybe it's after him. Why? Raised an eyebrow at Noah. Yes, why? I know, Sebastian said. She's so smart. I'm afraid of her sometimes. Maybe she thought he needed help. I don't know, said Christopher. He's kind of scared of her. And for good reason. Our Nada is a great dog. I can confirm that, grinned John. So, smart too. Last year, when we went duck hunting together, remember, Sebastian, but we thought it was Nada who was spoiling the hunt for us, jumping and barking. But then we realized it was her leading us on. She's beckoning us to follow her. And what do you think? John, as any self-respecting storyteller, the hunter held a spectacular pause. It turns out that she was calling us to the swamp. Where have you got the moose? We barely got it out of Akatov. You think she went after Robert? Because he might need help. Christina frowned, because it sounded so fantastic. You live as long as I have. Sebastian winked. You'll believe in more than that. If you do. I don't know, but Nada's been weird lately, that's for sure. She's been going out at night, silly girl. The snowmobiles stopped near a couple of tall pine trees that had grown so close to each other that they'd become intertwined with the trunks. See, over there, John pointed ahead, where the darker is the dense, naked, gloomy thicket of bushes. That's where the house is. That's how I got the people. He patted himself on the shoulder. There is a weapon, but I will not use it. Clearly, it's a restraining device. Let's say, to keep this lunatic from coming at us. It's loaded. Careful, asked Christina. In our village, hunters don't walk otherwise. Without a smile, John replied. We not only have wolves here, but if you go farther away, you can also come across a bear on a lynx. Christina moved closer to Noah, as if unconsciously fearful of you. If we get out, I will never go into the wilderness. I'll be in the city all the time. Noah smiled at her. The city is statistically just as dangerous. And me, he added, I love nature. My parents have a chalet in the mountains. We spend every New Year's Eve there. True, Christina smiled back and flapped her eyelashes. And how is it in Switzerland in general? Beautiful. Oh, Christopher wrinkled his nose and turned to John on the sea. Grown-ups go straight to love, as if there are no other interesting things in the world. So let's get down to business, strictly and loudly urged everyone to pay attention. John, the doctor, and I will go first. Christina, hang on, behind with the boy. Oh, sorry, generously he winked at Bora. With Christopher Ivanovich. Not freaking out, not in a hurry. Everyone went quietly. They didn't know what to expect, and they were quite surprised that when they approached the house, it seemed as if no one was in it. Or there was a fence once outlining. The yard had long since rotted away. The house itself, despite the good brickwork, gave the impression that it might collapse and fall apart at any moment. John, stepping forward, cautiously approached the windows, peered through them, and waved his hand, saying, "You may approach." Then, walking cautiously around the house, he went up on the porch and knocked on the door. Silence. Strange, Noah said. Maybe he's not here anymore. Maybe he decided to settle somewhere else. Or what? Or he didn't have time to finish, because from inside the house came a sound, a muffled, suppressed, full of agony groan. "Let me," John, putting his hand on the door, gently pushed it open. It was not locked. Then, taking a flashlight from his belt, turned it on and initiated inside. Inside the house had managed to stand everything, but it was clear. Not so long ago, a fireplace had been stoked here, or rather, a fire had been built in what was left of the fireplace in the entrance hall of the house, and the room that opened right behind it was in disrepair. But it was also clear that a man had lived here. Some of the dust had been wiped off. There was a relatively new mattress on the floor and some food on the table by the window. Kevin called out to Noah quietly, but with amazement, and the small company rushed to one corner of the room, where what they had at first taken for a mountain of old rags turned out to be a man who had plunged into anything, apparently putting on all the clothes he had. Noah didn't remember his patient's face well because he had been working at another clinic for the past few years. But now, having finally met the man whose face he had seen in a recent journalist's program, he realized it was definitely him. And in general, Dr. Steele had never been one of those psychiatrists who confidently made a diagnosis on first impression. But now, looking at this man, he could tell Kevin was sick, and the insanity of his former patient was now far more severe than what he and his colleagues had encountered when they had tried to treat the same man in the Swiss clinic. Kevin sat back into a sort of pathetic tangle and wrapped his arms around himself. His gaze darted hysterically from side to side. He looked as if through the people who had come in and whispered something, what he was muttering. Christopher asked, "Should I punch him?" The bastard decided to take the apartment. "I can understand your anger." Noah literally intercepted the already raised fist of the teenager, but right now you have a sick man in front of you. He doesn't even seem to be aware of the reality around him. And as for his speech, the doctor frowned. He seems to be afraid of the wolf. Yes, he says the wolf comes at night and dances around the house. He says the forest rejects his former master and wants to destroy him. "I don't understand," frowned John. "And just yesterday, this psycho was bragging about how cool he was. And now he's sickening to look at. He's a miserable man, and he looks like a complete psycho. We have such a character in our village, Vaska. When he's on a white fever, he's more normal. Kevin, can you hear me?" Noah, taking a miniature flashlight out of his pocket, shone it into the eyes of the former ambitious sect leader. "He's not well at all. I don't understand what could have changed his condition so dramatically. The human psyche, it's incredibly complex and malleable. But he needs to be admitted to a regular hospital immediately. He's clearly hypothermic and dehydrated. And of course, we need to contact the local psychiatrists. I'll tell them what happened to him during his treatment with us. And from there, he'll be their concern." John and Noah, with a shoulder to lean on, got him out of the house. Then they began to decide how to drive the snowmobiles back with some problematic load, but somehow they squeezed and accommodated him. Robert decided he'd had enough. He felt disgusted. He had pushed his wife into the arms of madness, and now he was powerless. He couldn't save her and left it to others. A few hours spent in the gatehouse, when he barely managed to start a fire. It was good that he found matches in his pocket. This Sebastian's grandfather had given him when they were going into the woods. Those few hours had proved to be the perfect time to think hard about everything. And now Robert had had enough. John swung the door open with determination and stepped outside. "Nada," he shouted, "I don't know why you don't like me so much, but I'm sorry, but I'm not afraid of you. And if you want to attack me, go ahead, but I'm still going after my wife." The last words Robert barely whispered over the rustling of bodies, because he nearly fell over immediately, because right in front of him, with one hand down on the beast, stood Wendy with her hair shot up in crumpled clothes, and with Wendy's eyes glittering feverishly. Robert swallowed hard. Suddenly, he remembered the legends and tales of the spirits of the forest that could take on different guises. "Wendy, I didn't cheat on you. I swear. I didn't do anything with Christina. I couldn't. Wendy, darling." The words came pouring out. Robert felt like he was in a dream. She was real. He was real. But as Wendy stepped toward him, the snow softly crunched beneath her feet, and then she threw herself at him tightly, hugged him tightly, and sobbed. He hugged her back. "Everything will be all right," Robert said, and there was nothing else he wanted to say right now. Questions and answers, explanations and confessions and promises, and forgiveness could and would have to wait. And now it was time to get out of the woods, and without mittens, Robert said. "Lost, yes. smiled Wendy as she ran away from the ghosts of the past. Did you lose it too? Yes, nodded Robert as he ran away from the wolf. Isn't that a dog? Wendy's eyes widened. A nice, kind dog. Yeah, hummed Robert. Wendy looked with interest at the Nada, who suddenly turned and asked to go somewhere behind the trees. Then she stopped and turned around, as if inviting people to follow her, and they followed. And now Robert was no longer afraid. Wood crackled peacefully in the fireplace, and the amber ruby flames filled the room warmly and cozily with furniture and Christina. Robert and Wendy sat on the rug in front of the fireplace, staring into it and silent. A snowstorm had developed outside the window. Since the day they had met in the woods and Nida had let them out, it had been exactly a year. And what kind of year had it been? It was a magical 12 months that their lives changed forever. Yes, when the initial emotions subsided, they had a serious conversation. Robert confessed that he had an affair on the side and was ready to accept any decision of his wife, and even expected that there would be a divorce. After all, he was well deserving of it. But Wendy said she wanted to give them a second chance and try to start over. But back in those days, Robert and Wendy were concerned about more than just their relationship. They had many other issues to work out. So Wendy told about what had happened then in the abandoned house between her and Kevin. And it turns out they were just talking about the magnet. A strange beggarly fascination. This kind of return to the past quickly left Wendy, and she wanted to leave. But Kevin was against it. He demanded that she stay. He said she was certainly too old for him, but he had no intention of letting her go. Wendy, in those moments, already suddenly realizing what a mistake she had made, fell into a strange state. It was as if she had relived the horror and confusion that had seized her 10 years ago, when she had been rescued from the captivity of that madman. Stephen, by this time, was gone. This man in general quickly realized how misguided he had been in his supposed teachers and guides, to oneness with the natural world. And when Wendy and Kevin were finally alone, they were talking. And somehow it happened that the thread of the conversation, figuratively speaking, was suddenly in Wendy's hands. Wendy suddenly starts yelling at Kevin and saying how much she hates him. So he broke her life. She told how much it had cost her to feel human again, how she had tried to start a normal family, to live a normal life. I made a mistake then. I let you break me, Wendy screamed. And now how come? I thought I was alone. And you're the only one who can help me, but you can't. You're nothing but a worthless old fool. You're a madman. They were talking at the window of the old house, and suddenly Nada appeared outside the window. Kevin began to convince Wendy that she was wrong, because here is an example in the forest. There are wolves, scary, scary beast, and only he, Kevin, can protect her from them. Wolves? Wendy laughed. It's just a dog. Wolves don't look like that. What are you? An old madman. You've never seen a real wolf. An argument ensued, and Wendy said she would go right out to the animal and not do anything to it. Kevin begged her not to, but Wendy came out of the house, saying it was just a dog from the village. Probably let it off the chain. So she ran in here, and when she freely stood in front of Nida and stroked her behind the ear, Kevin broke down. After that, Wendy went back into the house. She decided to wait until morning because it was already night. And they talked again, or rather, Wendy talked. She talked about her life, about how she had tried to find happiness, how wrong she had been, unable to build a decent relationship with her husband. Anyway, it was a very long monologue. She just needed to vent. So you're saying that Kevin, that he's lost his mind? I mean, he's completely freaked out just because my wife talked to him. Noah, Robert asked in amazement. Dr. Steele replied that the mind of a madman like Kevin has a bizarre structure. And yes, apparently, he just couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand the fact that his victim had grown stronger after years, had started to live a normal life. And even now, having come to him again and voluntarily, suddenly found the strength to resist his influence. After all, before that, all those whom Kevin had allowed close to him, they had obeyed him. And it should not have been ruled out, by the way, that he was abandoned by another man, Stephen. Basically, Kevin was shattered by the fact that he realized he had lost his power over people. He's not the same person he used to be, and he couldn't take that kind of humiliation from himself. Robert and Wendy would have wanted to stay out of it, but they watched what happened next and breathed a sigh of relief when they learned that Kevin had ended up in an insane asylum, but not in Switzerland. Stephen, by the way, managed to successfully revoke the deed of gift. He just took it with him when he left Kevin and burned it. Christina apologized to Wendy and soon quit the firm, moved to another city and later sent word, met a man there and married. Noah, on the other hand, returned home to Switzerland where he continued his practice. Before that, he talked to Wendy and expressed his admiration for the fact that, despite such a difficult past, she had found the strength to move on and fight for her happiness. But the highlight of the last year was when Wendy managed to get pregnant. Doctors said that it is a quirk of the body, in which something has adjusted itself. And now Robert and Wendy were enjoying a vacation in one cozy country holiday home. They were looking at the fire, holding hands, and just being happy. They were very happy. Robert cautiously peeked out of his hiding place to check. The wolf was still there. A wolf, or rather a police-sized beast capable of rivaling a cave-dwelling primitive creature. It hadn't gone anywhere and was carefree, rolling around in the freshly fallen snow, playing catch with its own tail and licking its rich coat. She seemed to demonstrate who was the true master of the situation here and who was an unlucky little man who, by his stupidity and as if as a punishment from the universe, got into such a story, which if you tell them, they won't believe and will call him a fantasist, an inventor, who just wants to distract normal people with scary stories. Robert sobbing, because it was not to courage, but just very scary. I quietly closed the shutters of the window in the gatehouse and put the deadbolt back in place. He looked at the five, who shrewdly gave the last wood. There was, of course, still some simple furniture, so, theoretically, he wouldn't have to be cold for the next 24 hours. But the food was bad. The old woman, to all appearances, had not been used for the last years, so there was only what happened to be in her pocket, a chocolate nut bar. But even let it, having torn off the bar and its packaging, Robert greedily snatched a piece and started chewing vigorously. To save money, he saw no point in eating because he was about to risk everything by going outside. And there, if the wolf's offspring didn't catch him, he would soon reach human habitation because the village was at most an hour's walk away. If the wolf catches him, then it's foolish to think about anything at all. Then he won't need food anymore. How did I come to live like this? Robert asked aloud to himself, tearing the chocolate trace from his fingers. He didn't know the answer to that question, if only because just a couple of days ago, his life had been very ordinary and even peppery. However, this very peppercorn, which he decided to diversify his unsuccessful marriage of almost 10 years, and was, in fact, what led him to the present unenviable position. And if right now a good wizard appeared to Robert and offered to use a time machine to go back and fix everything, he would have agreed without a doubt. But the reality was that there were no good wizards around, and so the only thing to do was to live with what he had. If I live at all, Robert added aloud to his thoughts. Nervously, he giggled hysterically, because he really had no idea. How on earth would he ever get out of this whole thing now? When Robert had first married Wendy, he had belonged to that category of young people who believed that there was a place for true love, the kind of love that poets write poems about and fairy tales talk about. Robert was only 25 at the time, but the people around him called him unusually serious for his age, a young man who had not the wind in his head, but an organized plan. And that was actually true. Robert imagined his future in the style of finishing university and then living in a mansion. A successful businessman is happy with the woman he loves, and we have at least 4 children. What's there between uni and the life of a successful millionaire? He didn't have a very good idea and hoped that he would figure it out somehow. After all, Life is such an amazing thing and always ready to throw up new opportunities and good luck. You just have to look at them and reach out. Yes, that's what he used to be. And now, when Robert looked back at his young self, he was so ashamed of it. Naive, self-righteous outrage. Nothing. Life will sort things out, Robert's grandmother often said. And as it soon turned out, life, or if you prefer, Mrs. Fate, either a higher power or a simple coincidence. But something Robert soon clicked on his nose and showed him his place, and not a prosperous man and future millionaire. And when that fall, or if you will, the slouching began. It seems, as Robert thought later, when relatives from all sides began to say enough, they said, "Stop putting money in other people's pockets for rent. Better take out a mortgage, you'll manage just fine." So he and Wendy decided to take out a mortgage. And when she was not yet a wife, but a bride, she did something for which Robert respected her for years. She gave up a wedding trip to a tropical island in order to save up for a down payment. Admittedly, after a few years, the topic was lost with the tropical vacation. Wendy often berated her husband. "Yeah, I do everything for you." She said it in almost every argument they had. "You're the reason I've never seen the sea in my life. What's the problem?" For the next years was to go. Sometimes Robert tried to object. "You could even go alone, by the way, but maybe it would be cheaper that way." And when he said that, his smart and generally calm ones, Wendy would start sniffling like an indignant and simultaneously frightened gopher. And then she'd offer one of three counterarguments. First, it's unseemly for spouses to vacation apart. 2, they need to save money. And it's stupid. Cut back on spending all year, then splurge. Thirdly, she wanted to go to the seaside properly. They are in a mood that snatches from fate long desired, which constantly eludes her. And then sometimes, just sometimes, in lieu of such counterarguments, Wendy would start crying ugly tears with a wet, slippery nose, a shuddering of the shoulders, and a rise in tone to a level that was perhaps glass-breaking and weeping. This was how she was received at moments when Robert, out of ordinary sympathy and desire for reconciliation, tried to come over and hug her. "Don't touch me," Wendy might have exclaimed then. And he didn't. And when not only in such, but in many other quarrels, she said that she did not want to see him. Robert, accordingly, could shut up or leave the house, no matter what the weather or the time of day. But in general, if there was an outside observer who would call Robert for a frank conversation, and on the condition of anonymity, would ask him to say how he assesses his marriage, whether he is happy, Robert would answer positively, because, in principle, he is used to thinking that he is fine. He and Wendy are not a bad couple. Not the ideal woman, yes. Has it changed since you were a bride? Only ideals are only in fairy tales. But ideals are only in fairy tales, aren't they? And he's a little old for fairy tales in his 30s. And in this relatively contented state of marriage, Robert stayed for about 6 years. And then it went downhill. Like an avalanche, it mushroomed underneath, everything in its path. And what was the root cause? A lot of things. And then one day, Robert packed his suitcase. The pretext for leaving home was an imaginary business trip. In fact, Robert was not going to a neighboring city, but to other latitudes, to the sea. "Really?" Christina asked him enthusiastically. "Are you serious? You're not joking." "Who would joke like that?" Robert grinned, warmly, looking at the woman, at whose feet he was now ready to put not only the trip, but also many things, because she had become everything to him lately. And that woman was Robert's lover. And actually, if someone had told him a year ago that he would cheat, he would have laughed in that person's face. But life had decided otherwise. And this decision to have a mistress Robert made even before he met Christina, who worked in their office as his subordinate. She was a senior cleaner, or to put it more culturally, the head of the service company Sunrise, which decided that its own cleaning service is more reliable and profitable than hiring it from the outside from time to time. Not a big bird in theory, But Robert, for one thing, wasn't the kind of man who recognizes the strictures of social status. In the second place, you're charming, funny, and not belligerent. Christina was in love, it seems, with the entire staff. And to her credit, it was worth saying that she behaved decently and kept her distance with everyone except Robert. He himself couldn't quite understand why they'd gotten so close. "You're the real deal," Christina once said. "You've got it written all over your face." "Really?" he hummed confusedly. "And what did you read there?" "That you're unhappy in your marriage. And when you call your wife at lunchtime every day, you look like a man who's forced to pull out a fireplace with his bare hands." Robert couldn't find anything to say in response because Christina was right. Lately, he'd been having a hard time with the obligatory good son role, and he wasn't the only one who owed everyone. He owed his parents to help build a cottage, to visit regularly, to tell them about life with Wendy. And in principle, the first was normal, because Robert understood that rest in the fresh air is necessary for a modern man. But the fact that his mother wanted to know details about family life, and then instructed him that he did not behave that way with his wife, that he should, and so to say, it was tense, but there was no way to avoid it. Otherwise, Mom grabbed at the heart. The son had grown up. She said sobbing mother is no longer needed in the trash and on the garbage dump. "So, son, don't you want to send me and my father to a nursing home?" Robert would get a kick out of it every time. If my father witnessed such a thing, he just rolled his eyes and grinned. "I've lived with her all my life, son," he said, and then he would try to calm his wife down. But Robert's mother was stubborn and knew how to take offense at the fact that someone did not obey her long and tastefully. Robert also owed a debt to the firm he worked for. However, it was understandable and natural. They give you money, you give them your professional skills. He was used to it. Everything was clear and normal here. And Robert owed Wendy, and he didn't realize it anymore, when he'd managed to become a debtor to her instead of a beloved husband. But lately she'd been going on and on about how tired she was of him getting up an hour early and rattling dishes while she made herself breakfast. From the way he pulls a blanket over her at night and coughs from what he sees as her dishwasher and multi-cook functions. They are women's favorites. That last one was actually funny and sad to the point of tears at the same time. "So let's divide up the chores," Robert suggested. "If you're tired, I'll help, of course." "I don't need anything else," Wendy replied. "I knew what I was getting into when I got married, but I thought you'd see me as a woman." Then Robert almost blurted out in reply that sometimes he saw in her, however, not the woman he loved, but the angry, a little hysterical, wild image. But of course he didn't say that and asked to clarify what was wrong. And it turned out that Wendy herself does not know. Gone is the romance. No more passion. And that's when he left home again, went to his parents' house. Only his father was there. Mom had gone to a distant relative. "You know, it's probably my fault. I opened up to my dad. I should have gone to more doctors to fix the problem. Maybe then she wouldn't have thought I was worthless." "You're not stupid," my father said. "You talk like that." The point was that Robert and Wendy had been unable to have a child throughout their marriage. And of course, they'd had a lot of tests that showed they were perfectly healthy. Doctors were throwing up their hands, and only one of them made a suggestion that it could be a matter of genetic incompatibility, but it's not accurate. And more research was needed. But Wendy adamantly refused. And when we got home from that last doctor, there was another scandal. And she said that maybe she couldn't get pregnant because she subconsciously felt insecure around Robert. "So should we get a divorce?" he asked. "Deef?" "No," replied Wendy. After a long silence, "I still love you. And I love you." "Hard S. Glazunov," answered Robert, except that these magic words came so easily this time and somehow faded, as if he had said something banal, like "I love." "Blueberry jam." "Let's just live together," Wendy said then, looking into his eyes. "We're already married, aren't we?" Robert nodded silently. And they just went on living together. But that conversation had taken place almost 2 years ago, but it had been the starting point after which Robert had realized, deep down inside him, that something had cracked and fractured, and he would never be the same again. He tried to weigh everything judiciously. Should they really get a divorce? After all, just because a man and a woman got married didn't mean they had to live together all their lives. By default, this is a modern world, not a medieval one. But then he realized he really didn't want to break up with Wendy. Why not? If only because he's used to it. A family member. After all those years together. Yes, there were difficulties, but who doesn't have them? And then divorce is the need to divide the property, the apartment, for which the mortgage is paid, the car, which is also taken on credit. Divorce is a discord between relatives and friends who will take one side or the other. Divorce is pain. But who will guarantee that when they divorce, they will then meet people with whom they can create a better family than they had? There are no such guarantees, so Robert decides, well, they'll live together. And then maybe things would change. And then things did change, and he decided to cheat on his wife. The decision. It came unexpectedly, but mundanely, calmly. Just Robert suddenly heard colleagues talking about the fact that British scientists said that such a percentage of married couples cheat on each other. And Robert thought, what if his Wendy had had a lover for a long time? Maybe she does. And why wouldn't he find himself a woman? Take the edge off. No serious love, of course. But neither was living like this in a marriage that resembled breadcrumbs at the stage. Now he didn't have. He couldn't do it anymore. And then he turned his attention to Christina. They didn't start sleeping together right away. They just dated. You know, you're weird, Christina told him one day. It was summer, and they were walking in the park. And right now, they were up on a Ferris wheel to a height closer to where the birds fly. And I would have thought maybe even a maniac. Christina giggled. Why? Robert wondered. Because I read books about werewolves. That's sci-fi. Because you asked me out, but you've never kissed me, she said, like she meant it, but her eyes were warm and her lips were quivering. I was about to crack a smile. Or are you the kind of guy who doesn't need intimacy at all? It was strange, but Robert was embarrassed by the conversation. A grown man decides to have a mistress and is embarrassed when she talks about personal things. But isn't he stupid? But although he gave himself a mental smack, but outwardly held with a full sense of dignity. How can I be your mistress if there is nothing between us? Christina asked, looking him straight in the eye. And the wind brushed her blonde hair. But I can't call you a friend, answered at last. And then, one day we can have everything. One day, Christina grinned. What an amazing man you are. I like you for that, though. And now, she added with feigned courtly sternness, unless you want us to part when we go downstairs, just friends. Kiss me kissingly, vividly, and for real. Come on. And he kissed her, in a way that made her dizzy, and her breath rushed in a ridge of relaxed gold in his chest. And as they walked downstairs, stepping onto the ground, Robert realized he'd crossed the line. It wasn't just a dalliance anymore. He'd really cheated on his wife. And how disgusting it was, but at the same time cried inside a sweet feeling, as if with this vicious secret of his, he was paying Wendy in full for how cold, irritable, and uncomprehending she was. Yes, thought Robert, you've been ignoring me for too long, haven't you? Acting as if I were tied to you forever and had to listen to everything. What are you nagging me about? My wife. But it's not like that anymore. I'm free now, and I'll live my life as I choose. Our plane is preparing to make its final approach, so please fasten your seatbelts, and don't forget to look out the window. In front of you is the Pearl of the Seychelles, where an unforgettable vacation awaits you. The stewardess' sing-song speech of the charter flight that carried Robert and Christina to the resort came to an end, and many of the passengers clapped their hands. Just magical, Christina said once. Now that he was at a different point, Christina, He had no doubt whatsoever that he had made the right choice, flying to a vacation with Nancy, who was no longer the woman he had married long ago. It was a waste of money. As it is, he's not really committing anything that criminal. Yes, by accepted standards of morality, a man and a substitute for his wife is not a good man. But on the other hand, what about the fact that a wife can, over the years of marriage, literally push her spouse into it with her coldness, favor, and other flawed flaws? What is he, a slave to her to suffer? No way in hell. That was Robert's thinking. As they walked down the airplane ramp, went through customs, and fished their luggage out of the belt. And he was also thinking that perhaps, and probably, this little love adventure would help him decide to get a divorce. Yes, indeed, it would be better that way. Otherwise, he and Nancy would continue to live like this, as if they were incomprehensible. Too bad for spouses, and not good enough for friends. And then, maybe by separating, they could finally be happy on their own. Maybe. Perhaps she will find a man to suit her, and they will be compatible in everything, including the ability to bear a child. And he, Robert, looked fondly at Christina, who was raving about the surrounding scenery, taking pictures, and licking exotic flavored ice cream. Coconut cactus. Want some? She offered him one. But Robert shook his head. He wouldn't risk such savagery. But the fact that he had tasted adultery almost once before, he liked it very much. When her husband left on a business trip, Wendy closed the door behind him and breathed a sigh of relief to finally be alone. Not that she was tired. Though yes, she was tired. Walking to the hall and bedroom, she opened the shutters, letting sparks of frosty fresh air into the rooms. Finally, she could get some fresh air. My husband was always grumbling that it was blowing. Asked me to close it. And Wendy thought, no need for a hearty hot meal tonight. She'd have enough yogurt and cookies. And then, since it was her day off, she could occupy the TV all evening to watch her favorite show, and some silly show. Not that her husband forbids it, but definitely the grumbling grandmother reminded her, it's not the most intellectual vacation, and it would be better to watch this or that popular blogger who tell a story about space. Wendy only nodded and asked me not to try to bring her up anymore. Yeah, I'm not. Robert replied one day. I just want to get you interested in something. Why? She asked. Because people in a family should have common interests. Why? She repeated. A question, and with an unhealthy, as she herself realized, pleasure. Noticed that her husband began to get a little irritated. Yes, because when people live together, they should have something in common besides the payment of utility bills and the same bed, he added, suppressing 6 at the end, with the words that in this very bed, by the way, they have not had anything in the intimate plan for almost a year. But Robert didn't say that because he didn't want to rudely insult the woman he had once loved with all his heart and still respected. In a way, you can just live together. Wendy shrugged and went back to watching her show. We're a bunch of people in one house in the countryside, where there wasn't a root vegetable garden though. Tried to play farm life and build love. You having been voted in periodically by the viewers. Robert wrinkled his nose. Personally, he thought his wife was watching nonsense, and perhaps that's why she had become like that. Or maybe one didn't depend on the other. And he was just a snob with a prejudiced opinion, mixed with a quiet as a spectacle in the depths of the volcano-cool, still lava dislike for the man he once loved. The bonds of affection for whom are now seen as chains, and the obligations of a close relationship as a burden. Previously, both parties. But be that as it may, Robert had not tried to instill his interests in Wendy for months, and was silent about how he himself spent his free time. Wendy only knew that he was fixing something there in the garage, helping a friend to collect old junk, proudly called retro car, and also goes to the rope park, where, of course, risked breaking his neck. Also, oh well, it's been done before anyway. Wendy was already used to taking her husband indifferently. It was better than worrying about them being estranged. Better to give each other freedom and just live side by side. Yes, it was possible. And Wendy had the example of her own parents in front of her. Molly and Sam had even divorced when Wendy was just a baby. But then, under pressure from relatives and realizing that their daughter needed a full family, they had come together. And even now, when she's grown up and left the nest, they're still together. Habit. Molly once explained the situation to her daughter. We just realized it was more peaceful. And you never regretted not finding love? Wendy asked. The conversation had taken place shortly before the wedding with Robert. Love grinned bitterly. Molly. What is it? Scientists say it's the hormones a person produces. But you and I are not teenagers to believe in that nonsense. Love can be a good thing at first to help you know what kind of person you want to be with. And then, when you've gotten used to it, you get used to it. It's okay if love passes, but there are still a lot of important things left to do. Even the most important things. Molly raised her finger emphatically. You know what I mean. The possessions that mutual friends have made together. The closeness in terms of having someone around to take care of you if anything. And you just live together because one person can't be close. And if you chase love, I'm sorry to be blunt. Like an animal, a man will love, fall out of love. And what? Split up. Destroyed the family. No, daughter, love is a fairy tale. It's a beautiful, brightly colored fruit, you know. But it's what's inside the fruit that counts. The flavor, cautiously suggested Wendy, who didn't quite get the gist of what her mother was telling her about vitamins. Molly grinned. You think? Carefully with squeamishness, said Wendy. Me and Robert might be the same way. I mean, one day we'll love each other. No one can predict, Molly replied. Otherwise, the world would be a trouble-free place. Hello. Yes, this is his wife. Wendy answered the phone from the office where her husband worked. 2 days after he left on a business trip, there was a pan frying turkey meatballs. Robert hated those, by the way. The husband did not understand how important it was to watch his health and demanded nightmarishly unhealthy cutlets with fatty pork and white bread. What do you mean it hurts? Oh, Wendy, no matter how their relationship went, but she did not show rigid indifference to her spouse. So he became alarmed when a colleague of Robert's began to inquire about his health. What do you mean? On sick leave. You sent him on a business trip, didn't you? Wendy sat down on a chair. A confused message was heard from the other side. And then Robert's colleague said that he knew that the man had said he was very sick, so he wouldn't be at work for 5 days. He would bring the certificates later, and he had not been sent on any business trip. We were afraid that there was an epidemic. A colleague chuckled nervously and explained that Christina had taken sick leave along with Robert. Wendy replied that no, her husband isn't home. He's gone in general, and she doesn't understand what's going on. The colleague from the other side hurriedly ended the conversation, only asking that as soon as Robert showed up, he was told that he was very much needed in the office, and an explanation for what the project at risk of disruption is also needed. From the kitchen came the distinct odor of fried food. It was time to take the cutlets off and send them off to finish cooking in the oven. But Wendy stood in the hall with the phone in her hand and frowned, trying to figure out what was going on. Then determinedly, she pressed the call to Robert's contact. Yes, he answered. What's wrong? I'm on the road. I told him not to bother you. Where are you? Wendy asked. And Robert was strangely silent. It seemed that in that silence, he knew what he knew. He'd been caught in a lie. Honey, I told you, the office called, said Wendy. You weren't sent on a business trip, Wendy, and I'll explain. Robert had taken the call as he stood on the quay and was now trying to find a quiet, secluded spot. There was a motley festival of local culture taking place on the island, and it was quite noisy. He was already regretting picking up the phone. Where are you? On a soap opera. Wendy, don't lie to me. Am I too young to tell you about my bare feet? Robert was bitten by some kind of insect. They said it's lice season on the island, and he wasn't expecting lice. The aggressive microphones made him very nervous and itchy. Why are you telling me with a Wendy? Gone somewhere. You what? What's that noise? There were girls and guys dancing around Robert who liked to palm their hands, a musical instrument like a drum. So you're in some kind of joint. Who do you think I am? Robert got mad. I don't drink at all. They're just dancers. Oh, that's what dancers are, girls. No, Wendy, you got it wrong. What's that noise out there? The hearing was terrible, but Wendy could make out something suspicious. You're at sea, Robert muttered. What are you? The kitchen no longer smelled very smoky from the kitchen. It was burning meat. You're at sea. You and your mistress have gone to a resort. The last one was spontaneous, and actually Wendy didn't believe it because it would be a ridiculous and idiotic platitude. I guessed, blurted out Robert, who was starting to get a little crazy from the scorching sun of the Marshak musicians who positively surrounded the tourist. Plus, this morning they'd been cheated out of money selling the Coral Reef tour. And although the loss was recovered thanks to the local police, the fallout remained. I'm off to the sea with my mistress, said Robert. What did you want me to do? Go on vacation with you? Does it hurt? I've had enough. We live worse than the neighbors. Why? I married you in the first place. You idiot. That you loved me. Smoke was coming from the kitchen besides the smell. Wendy was choking. Tears seemed to have accumulated in her whole being over the past years, but they couldn't find a way out. I love you, she whispered, and she didn't end the call, just threw the phone hard into the wall. And the foam turned out to be very sturdy and didn't even crack. Nancy picked up the smartphone. Robert was breathing heavily. The artists realized that the tourists did not care about them, continued to move along the embankment. What have I done? The first thought flashed through my mind. It's her own fault. The second thought flashed. I should call her. Gnaw a question into her brain. No, let her cool off, and I'll do the same. And besides, Robert wiped his face clean of sweat. Now you have to think really hard about what to say, because it looks like he just destroyed his marriage. Wendy acted machine-like. She walked to the kitchen, took the skillet off the stove. You twisted the cold water faucet and stuck her dishes under the spray. The body finally gave in. Tears streamed down her face, and she felt a little better. Cheated, betrayed, heavy bells rang in my brain. Wendy went back into the hall after taking care of the frying pan. She lay down on the couch, curled up in a ball like a cat, and hugged the pillow, howled softly into it. It hurt. How can it hurt like that? Tearing something up inside if you're not physically ill. How can you want to fall through the ground, to dissolve into nothingness, and still be able to continue in your body? How could you love a person so much and hate them at the same time? She didn't catch that moment when she fell asleep, rather immersed in the heavy drama, the one her brain had sent her soul-suffering body into. And when Wendy opened her eyes, she realized it was 0 o'clock or evening still in the winter's early darkness. You can tell. The TV was still on. Wendy lost her eyes. The picture kept popping up. Must be because she cried a lot. Kevin, the Tega master, famous in his day, had finally returned to his students, the journalist said. The boy completely in a funny gray hat, tied ears. Behind the boy's back stretched the humblest-looking village. What's in store for us? Cheerfully, we will finish with a red nose. He asked the audience. Will Kevin have new followers, or will some of the old ones follow the teacher who has returned from almost 10 years of confinement in a psychiatric hospital? Unfortunately, continued the journalist, shifting from foot to foot, we did not manage to communicate with the hero of our story. He, as before, leads the life of a recluse, but we will try to keep you informed. And if you want to know more about the mysterious master of the Tega, then be sure to watch the documentary, which you can find online at the portal. Wendy frantically grabbed the remote and turned off the TV, her please cold sweat, and not from hysteria. It was just that now the past, which she thought was long buried, suddenly appeared to her. The airplane soared into the sky. Robert leaned back tiredly in his chair. The last couple of days, that is, the end of the little vacation in the Seychelles, had not been easy for him. And most importantly, he had ruined it all himself. After all, if only he hadn't answered his wife's call, he would have called her back later. For example, from the hotel room, then perhaps it would have been possible to compose a true lie, and everything would have been fine, at least for those couple days. But Robert held back from ruining Christina's vacation and told her everything just before the return flight. So now she knows all about us, the young woman sighed. Your hands are icy cold, she said, drawn across the windowsill chair and wrapped her fingers around his palm. So we should get together and talk about everything. What? Robert, rounding my eyes. You want to meet my wife? Have you forgotten what we talked about? I squinted my eyes reproachfully. Christina, I told you from the beginning I don't want to spend a few years as a married man's mistress. We're trying to build a relationship together. And if all goes well, we reveal the whole truth. Divorce is all serious and honest. Yes, I remember, nodded Robert. They had that arrangement. And because of it, by the way, he had even more respect for Christina. A serious woman, not willing to torture the other side for years for nothing, making everyone live a lie. Except, but technically Robert's lips trembled in a nervous smile. We never became lovers in that very sense. I know, Christina grinned, and lingered even closer than she'd poked him on the cheek. And I kept wondering what was the point of getting a room for two and sleeping in separate beds. And I thought that here in this corner of Christina we could bond, take our relationship to the next level. But you're right. We're not technically lovers, but we're not really friends anymore. Any normal woman would start twiddling her thumbs. That we spend time together, that we have dinner, that we kiss, that we vacation together. She'd consider all that cheating. The full ones. And we don't even need a bed. Besides, even if we say nothing happened, you know she won't believe us. Yeah, Robert sighed. It's just that it's all so sudden, and you compare it to a sore tooth that could have hung around for months, but had to be pulled. Christina offered a not the most apt, but vivid parallel. Unpleasant, unexpected, but then you can forget about it. Robert knocked on the door a second time. He had his own keys, of course, but he would have preferred to enter the apartment so that Wendy would let him in. But she wouldn't open the door or answer the phone. It was understandable, though. Robert would not have been surprised to find the apartment empty, that is, the absence of his wife's things, and then to find her at her parents'. He was morally prepared that Wendy would tell about the affair to all relatives and acquaintances, and it would start. But for what he discovered when he opened the door with his own key, entered the apartment, he wasn't prepared at all. What is this? Christina pressed her palm to her mouth, and with her other hand pointed to the wreath. A funeral black wreath stood in the hallway, and on the ribbon was the name Wendy. No, dropping her travel bag on the floor. Robert, swaying as if drunk, strode down the corridor into the hall. Wendy, he thought he screamed, but in fact he whispered. Other tragic signs were found here. Mingled with the black cloth of the platinum cabinet mirror, on the joint photos stood black ribbons on the high pedestal, and carnations scattered on the floor. No. Robert clutched his hands in his hair. He looked around hysterically, as if he expected Wendy to materialize out of thin air, and it would all turn out to be some monstrous mistake, some stupid misunderstanding. She, Christina, was about the same shock. No one called you from the family. No sobbing, like Robert. The thought went through her head that something had happened to her. Maybe her heart burst from grief. He'd heard of such things, and he didn't know if his Wendy was real. Wendy's family. She'd died, and he hadn't been told, hadn't seen fit, because he cheated. Robert. He shuddered in his bitter stupor, didn't immediately realize what was happening. Christina was waving her hand in front of his eyes and pointing at the phone. It was Wendy's phone. It was ringing. The caller ID was signed as Mom. Yes, Robert took the call. He waited to hear something that would confirm his fearful hunch. Robert, son, Molly spoke in her usual good-natured manner. Tell her to call me anyway. What? Robert pressed his hand to his chest. His heart was heavy, booming somewhere in his throat. Molly answered from the sanitarium. Or else she's gone. and got some milk. No, let her call me and tell me normally what they feed there, what procedures there are. I mean, why the treatments? Christina's eyes widened. She also obviously wanted to understand what the conversation was about. Robert, after a couple of minutes, when he gave out only aha and aha, plus also necessarily Molly Vasilievna, finally ended the conversation and turned to the almost mistress with a silly face. She, living in the morning with her mother, said in the sanatorium left. And what is this? Christina waved his hands. How? But what does it mean? I don't know. Robert sat down on the couch with 2 fingers, putting the carnation aside. This is crazy, he muttered. She's alive, so it's this one. Go ahead, dial her again from her cell phone. Robert scratched his head, then recounted the conversation with his mother-in-law to Christina in detail. From the words of Molly, and Wendy went to a country sanatorium to improve her health over the weekend, which she additionally took time off work. She said that the sanatorium is necessary because the doctor advised so. Yes, also just wants to relieve stress and will take her phone with her. But the other one's not a smartphone. It's got buttons, but he will almost never use it because the psychologist advises minimum communication even with family and maximum focus on himself. Only understand the point, said Robert. My wife has never seen a psychologist. I suggested it to her myself. I told her that there were specialists in family relations, but she didn't understand it. You know, Christina said thoughtfully, twirling something in her hands and then holding it out to Robert, who took it and frowned. It turned out to be a booklet of the sanatorium Cedar Grove, which told about luxury outdoor recreation in high comfort. Look, there's an address and directions, Robert said, running his finger along one side of the booklet. So she went to the sanatorium after all, Christina said, confused. But what's this all about? I have no idea. Robert got up. But I'll find out. I'm going after her. I'm with you, and don't you dare object. Christina raised her hand warningly. After all, it's my fault too. I'll tell your wife myself that nothing happened between us. That now Robert was at a loss. And I thought, I don't know what's wrong with her head. Christina stepped carefully over the nail. But a normal person wouldn't do that. She's definitely having a nervous breakdown. And we're responsible for that. So let's get to the bus station. It's in the Cedar Groves by the Elks Antlers. But I think we'll get there soon. Robert tried to call his wife on the second number while we were getting there, but she was already picking up. He whispered in agonized anticipation, listening to one dial tone after another. And then suddenly they were gone too. Now the caller was temporarily unavailable. And Robert finally reached the sanatorium. And on first impression, it was a decent place. It was located in the suburbs, was really surrounded by cadders and their other warriors of trees. Hello, Robert. I flew up to the reception desk. Good morning. Smiled at the girl behind the counter. Welcome. I'm not on vacation. I'm looking for my wife, Robert blurted out. I'm sorry, the girl behind the counter said, embarrassed. I don't quite understand you. Robert tried to explain that his wife had come here and he needed to talk to her urgently. Family business. They had a fight and he's worried she might be a little out of sorts. I'm sorry, but we don't share information about our guests with third parties. The girl took a chance. What third party? Robert was indignant. I'm her husband. Good afternoon. There's a problem. There's a new character at the front desk. The receptionist is a very polite and equally repulsive-looking man in a suit. He too remained deaf to Robert's requests and demands and recommended him to contact his wife in any way he could, but not by trying to rage in their sanatorium. Robert, however, was stubbornly adamant. So, man, I tried a nice way. The mask of politeness fell off the receptionist's face. You're about to get kicked out by security. Get out. Pardon me for interrupting, but you're Wendy's husband. Maiden name Snigger. Robert turned around glumly, ready for someone else to show up who will prevent him from finding his wife. The man standing next to him did not look like a sanatorium employee. Rather, he looked like a scientist, such a classical intellectual, who came to write a clever book in the quiet countryside for inspiration. Jeans, plaid beer shirt, over blonde, slightly gripped hair, square glasses. He looked to be about 35 years old. "Yes, there was always Snigger," Robert replied. "Do you know her?" In a way, the blonde man hummed. "We can talk." "It's okay," he said, to the receptionist, who was apparently one step away from calling security. "These are my friends. Let's go. You see, I was just walking by and happened to hear a familiar name." That's what happened. Robert asked his wife, calling her by her maiden name because she kept it after the wedding. There was a little scandal about it, by the way. Wendy's mother-in-law took offense, considered it disrespectful to her son. But Robert did not insist. He understood and accepted that Wendy wanted to keep her last name. "My name is Noah." The new acquaintance introduced himself. "And you are?" He looked questioningly at Christina. "My acquaintance, Christina," Christina said, as if she were just an acquaintance, stepping next to him. After passing the hotel lobby, they entered a pretty room with an abundance of live plants. It looked like a winter garden, and they were seated in a corner behind a projecting part of the wall. Everyone on a sofa and an armchair. "How do you know my wife?" Robert was quick to ask. "She's here. You know, I've been seeing her for a while. Let's clarify a few things to prevent misunderstandings. I don't know Wendy personally, but let's just say I was familiar with her personality." In a certain sense, it's like Robert frowned. "I don't understand." "You know, it was a big surprise to me myself to hear that she might have shown up here." Noah, taking off his glasses, took a handkerchief out of his pocket and began to wipe them carefully. "You see, I'm a psychiatrist, trained in Switzerland, and practiced there for a while. And then I decided to come here. To be more precise, I was brought here by a patient. I have been treating him for a long time, but my colleagues told me about the unexpected development of this case. Let me start in order." Noah started off by explaining that he wasn't really a foreigner. His mother was Russian, but his father was a foreigner in the full sense of the word, Austrian. Then, years ago, Noah, in the course of his work, acting as a colleague and assistant to a more experienced specialist, encountered one difficult case, which turned out to be a man in his 40s named Kevin. He had come to Switzerland for work. He had a good qualification as a welder, and for a few years he worked diligently for a construction company. But then, in fact, it all started with the appeal of his employer, who was concerned about the strange behavior of his subordinate. The fact was that Kevin, previously characterized by silent network and even withdrawn, suddenly became very active in communicating with others to convey their ideas. It turned out that he decided to found his own, figuratively speaking, cult. Kevin represented himself as its leader, hereditary sorcerer, having great power in the world of spirits. The essence of the doctrine composed. Kevin was that modern man suffers a lot and lives badly because he departed from the covenants of the ancestors and denied the unity with nature. And to be saved, it is necessary to restore all this. But the practical part, the essence of salvation, was seen not in the fact that, for example, people should treat nature more carefully, take care of their families, take care of their relatives. Not at all. First of all, he believed that it was necessary to starve, as well as absolutely obey him, because he has a connection with the spirits of nature, and he can request for them. Man has many different and good things, but above all, cleansing on an energetic level. Kevin left his job and disappeared one day, but he was quickly found. It turned out that he had moved to some local village, where, strangely enough, he found followers. But Kevin didn't live in the village itself. He moved into an abandoned cabin in the woods. The employer went to him, and in the company of local environmentalists, because this house stood on the territory of the reserve, and no outsiders were supposed to be there. And Kevin? Well, it turns out this madman got it from somewhere. Wolverine kept her in a cage as a pet, and then let her down on uninvited guests. Anyway, we didn't have a quiet conversation, and from the one that did take place, It was clear that Kevin was out of his mind. He declared himself the master of the taiga, although, strictly speaking, there was no taiga in Switzerland. That's how Kevin ended up in the local psychiatric clinic. He was declared insane. He spent several years there for treatment, and then he was deported. It's been years. Wait, Robert interrupted the narrator impatiently. But what does this have to do with my wife? You know where your wife was when she first turned 18. With a soft and sad smile, asked Noah. Well, of course I do. Then she would have started Robert, but he immediately stopped talking, thinking. She wanted to go abroad after school to study. I remember Grant telling me she won. Yeah, she was an honor student, and her parents helped with the money, and he's in over his head. She went to university in Switzerland. Yeah, we met after she got back from there. She came back very quickly. She hadn't been there 3 months. But what happened? You know, don't you? Robert looked anxiously at Noah and continued. Then Kevin went into the clinic for a reason. If he hadn't been recognized as mentally ill, he would have faced serious consequences. As a result of being charged with many crimes, including the fact that they're in the wooded abandoned cabin, it turned out he wasn't alone. The thing was that 2 months before the cult of the Master of the Taiga collapsed from one university, a girl Russian student who had come to study to be a designer disappeared. Her friend said she had gone to see the local beauty and was going to hitchhike back. They discouraged her, but for some reason she was convinced that Switzerland was a very safe country and nothing would happen to her. But as it turned out, it was this girl Wendy who was found in the gatehouse with Kevin. She was his niece, but by the time she was rescued, he had already taken the chain off her because he had achieved his goal of breaking the poor girl's psyche. The thing was that Kevin dreamed of having many wives. He said that to exchange energy with nature, he needed at least 20 young beauties, and the first was 18-year-old Wendy. But she never said anything like that. Robert exhaled in shock. I didn't know that. It's the kind of story many people prefer to forget and not share with others. Noah grinned mirthfully. Have you heard of Stockholm Syndrome? Asked Noah. Robert shook his head. It's when the victim of an ordinary kidnapping begins to sympathize with his teacher over time, to understand his motives, to feel guilty about what happened. Noah was calmly explaining to Robert the nature of the trouble. What had happened to Wendy? After her release, she spent several months in a clinic where she was helped to literally piece back together her shattered personality. And then Wendy came home. Her parents said she just changed her mind about studying abroad, saying she couldn't handle the program and decided to change careers altogether, Robert said. But why didn't she tell me anything, even after the wedding? Because it's easier to forget about this nightmare. Few people are willing to go back to it, even mentally, even if it means opening up to those closest to them, Noah said. You said your patient brought you here. Breaking the somber silence that had fallen over the small company, Christina. You were talking about Kevin or Wendy. I'm afraid. Perhaps it's about both now, Noah said thoughtfully. The thing is, Kevin's back after so many years in the doldrums. He's trying to start a cult again, but now he's just the local weirdo around here for now. It's like he's not doing anything wrong. I mean, a man has a right to believe what he wants to believe, right? But I'm afraid he'll go beyond that. I'm afraid he's even more dangerous now. And for all I know, he's here, the sanitarium. Round my eyes. Robert? No, somewhere in one of the villages around here or in the woods, Noah said. And your wife? What did you say about her coming here? Her strange behavior. Perhaps she would have heard the chase, or he contacted her himself, and he wants her back. And she wanted that too. Though I'll admit, it's all rather odd. And something else happened. It's hard to deal with. But Robert, and then talked about what they found in the apartment when they returned. Very interesting, Noah thought. But in principle it could be explained. It probably symbolizes that Wendy has decided to break with her past life, to sort of die to the world. Now I'm sure she didn't come here by accident. She's looking for Kevin. and maybe she's already found him. And tell me if she's had any major upheavals recently, any severe emotional distress. Robert. He felt uncomfortable under the doctor's piercing gaze. He hesitated, then answered, "No, everything was fine. I was just away from home on a business trip and then came back." Back, he corrected cheerfully. "And here we are, me and Christina, a coworker I know. We're looking for Wendy, my wife, now." "I see," said Noah, and Robert had the strange feeling that Dr. Steele had looked right through him and didn't believe what he said. "What do we do?" Christina asked. "Who do we call? Who can help us?" "I think right now we can and should act on our own," said Noah. "After all, if right now Kevin isn't violating anything, if he hasn't kidnapped anyone else, then technically the man can do anything. So I think it's best we find him to start with. And as for your wife, I don't suppose she's here at the sanitarium. Unsure if I'd ever seen her here. I'd have noticed and remembered. Although, of course, I might have missed something. But I don't think she's here. And you know what? Is there any other place to start looking? I've been meaning to go there myself. It's the Village of Hedgehogs. What a nice name, huh?" Christina smiled. "When do we go?" "Best right now." Noah got up. "I have to pack. I'll be quick." "Did you have a car?" "No," sighed Robert. "What, are you stuck in mine?" "I rented a car," said Noah. The road to the village was fast and easy. It had been cleaned and was in good condition. There was silence on the road. Everyone had something to think about. Christina was reflecting on the fact that she had no intention of becoming the disciple of a happy family at all, and she would never have become the mistress of a married man if he had been doing well. But Robert, after all, he had said that he and his wife had been living as neighbors for a long time, and that it was mutual, that they had no feelings. And so her affair with Robert, Christina saw in the long run as something positive, not only for herself, but also for Wendy. After all, after the breakup, she could certainly meet another man with whom she would be happy. And that was weird. But right now, her own former views didn't seem so right to Christina anymore for some reason. She realized that, in fact, it was a flawed idea to break into the family, no matter what Robert said. If he was already divorced, then it would be possible to make love with a clear conscience. But as it was a bad thing. Hedgehog Village had once been a thriving place, but now there are mostly old people left here and very few young people. From the sanatorium to it was a short drive of less than half an hour, and since they didn't know how long it would take, Noah suggested to Robert and Christina that they get a room at the sanatorium. Fortunately, there were rooms available, and they immediately paid for their stay for 3 days. The girl at the reception desk looked suspiciously, but did not say anything, and she gave out the keys to 2 rooms. And what to do next? Christina drummed her fingers nervously on her knee. Just knock on houses and talk to people. "Luckily, I found out something," Noah said. Turns out he managed to search social media for locals and found someone. A kid named Christopher. This teenager was into computer games, but did well in school, and even won the Olympics in biology. He lived part of the time in the city with his father and mother, and for vacations he came to the village where he lived with his grandfather. "I signed up with him," Noah said. The boy sought help on the internet, joined groups where young people share problems in their relationships with their parents. "He's in trouble." The mother and father believed Kevin. "I wrote that I was the man's former primary care physician. Christopher is a smart boy," grinned Noah. "He didn't believe me right away. He demanded a scan of my diploma to confirm that I'd worked in Switzerland. He also said he wouldn't pay me any money. He'd had enough of one crook in his family. Anyway, we talked, and we're on our way to see him right now." Grandpa Christopher's house was at the very edge of the village. When the little company knocked on the gate, a huge dog came out of the box, and it was off the chain, and in fact it looked like a pure wolf. Robert shrieked with fright and almost ran away. I found a place out of the house in my slippers and threw them over my shoulders, and a skinny, tall teenager came out in a tulip. "Noah," he said with a squint, approaching and opening the wicket. "First time I've seen a foreigner. Nice to meet you." Noah replied with a smile and shook Bora's hand firmly. "And who is that with you?" asked the young man, a little suspiciously. "Psychiatrists do. Will you catch him together?" Christopher's eyes lit up with excitement. "Not exactly," Noah hummed and introduced his companions. "Wow," said Christopher at the fact that Kevin probably had a willing captive. "Let's go inside. It's frosty today, and Grandpa and I have just put the samovar on." The invitation was accepted by all with great pleasure. True, Robert was only glad to be warm, and so a piece of food was not in his throat. Christopher's grandfather, Sebastian, turned out to be a sturdy old man about 70 years old with a decent tail. He welcomed the guests cordially and took Noah very seriously, saying that they could use help with this scourge. "Yeah, he was here the other day," Sebastian said. "Kevin, this one went to get him to go door to door with Stephen." "That's my Christopher's father. Stephen is his father's name. You see, they wanted to talk to people. This journalist is still curious. I told them, 'Why are you filming him? Can't you see he's crazy and you're trying to stir him up?' What's it to the journalists? Are they filming themselves? I think this sectarian got Stephen drunk. And a drunk man, you know what I mean." Sebastian was coughing. "You just pour ideas into his head and he's happy to carry them. Maybe he's also a hypnotist. What do you think?" Sebastian looked questioningly at Noah. "I'd say he has a dark charisma, but no hypnotic powers," he replied. "So that makes two of them. Where do they live? Do we know?" "There is a version of it." Sebastian scratched his snow-white beard thoughtfully. "In the woods. Back in the 90s, a businessman wanted to build a house, almost built it, but he didn't live there. He disappeared. Well, there are ruins there. I don't know how to live there, but things happen. Sectarians." The old man waved his hands. "They are capable of anything." Suddenly, the door of Senya in the main room of the house ajar, and in it woke up a dog's muzzle eyes flashed yellow. "Nada is a good girl." Christopher beckoned the beast with that sausage, and when she approached, fearlessly sliced the treat, handed it to the toothy mouth. "What an interesting breed," said Robert, to whom it seemed that besides sausage this creature was interested in something else in this room, or rather to say him. "What breed?" Grandfather waved his hand. "Her mother ran away in the woods once. Took a long walk. I was thinking of getting a new dog, but she came back and brought the only puppy she had." "I think so," grinned the old man. "No other way than with a wolf. She made friends. She looks a lot like the Volga she found. I took her to the vet once, and everyone in town ran away from us, even though she was wearing a muzzle." Robert was also ready to run away, and in different directions at the same time, because Nada suddenly decided to sniff him, and the expression on her face became somehow squeamish. And then he sneezed. The dog wolf grunted and muffled. "She doesn't like you," Christopher said, but calmly and even cheerfully. "That's all right. She doesn't like many people at all. You're her type, though," the boy added, watching Noah scratch the animal behind the ears and wag his tail. "Oh, how cute." Christina smiled and took the opportunity to stroke the obvious predator. Christina snuggled up to Noah, and Robert knew it was strange and silly to feel that way. But he felt a pang of jealousy. Had he noticed that Christina was acting differently in the company of this style doctor? Flirtatious or something? Could it be that? Because he's a foreigner. And there was nothing intimate between him and Christina. They hadn't really started a serious relationship, but the prick of jealousy from logical reasoning never went away. "So we should go to the woods," Noah said, "and maybe we can settle this quietly, without too much trouble or fuss." He had no time to speak before the door of the house behind the drums, and somehow there was a sense of urgent, pressing need for this post. Or maybe there was trouble. Christopher went to open the door, and returned a minute later with a woman in her 40s. She had a crying face and a completely insane look. And here is the victim of our #1 sectarian. Sebastian's grandfather pointed at her with both hands. My daughter. Here she is, Dr. Jenna. And we have a psychiatrist, by the way, from Switzerland, and knows your guru of 3 days, continued the old man, not hiding the snide. My daughter has already grown big, and it's too late to bring you up, but out of respect for mine, be kind enough to sit down. Listen to what the learned man has to say. You have a lot of interesting things to say about Kevin the psychopath. Sebastian turned to know. He was about to answer. But Jenna, having finally regained her breath, blurted out first, Daddy, I was wrong. Oh, Daddy, what a fool I was. And the woman sobbed. You sit down. Christina, please sit down. Who are you? Asked Jenna, taking the advice to sit down. An acquaintance of mine, said Robert, and I'm the husband of a woman who seems to be a prisoner of this sect again. But what's going on? Dad? Asked Jenna, wiping her nose with a handkerchief. Then Christopher briefly outlined the situation to the mother. So what happened? Where's Dad? I told you not to talk to that psycho, the teenager resented. He's like hypnotizing. And you all, that this secret knowledge will help teach you how to live. Well, I figured it out. Did you realize that, who you messed with? And adults are smart. You on the mother, not on the gray, shook his head old man. And not such adults and smart in a hat are sometimes in sex. Jenna, you explain calmly what happened, and then we'll think together. That's what we're here for. Jenna told everything, confused and embarrassed. This woman had a good education. She'd studied at a teacher's college. Now she confessed that she simply did not understand how she could fall for all this, how she and her husband could so easily believe in all this nonsense that Kevin had. He said he knew the means to cure a man of all diseases, how to gain even immortality. He said that telepathy and many other abilities are inherent in every human being. But the modern world is not allowed to reveal this potential. But he knows how to fix it. You know, it was like an obsession. Jenna splashed her hands. It's like you're becoming a different person. And I'm so ashamed to admit it, but you kind of rise above all the other people because you know the truth. You have a mentor, I mean a master, and they are them. That is, all other people don't understand anything. They are stupid, but you realize that you were wrong. Noah gently took Jenna's hand lightly, squeezing her fingers. How did it happen? Kevin was at our house. Jenna lowered her eyes. Christopher had already left here to visit his grandfather, and my niece came over to visit. And Kevin. Anyway, I realized he was interested in her. I mean, he started talking to her all of a sudden. I realized he wanted her to believe him too.